Hey, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Tuesday Reasonably Fine Art Talk. It's a beautiful day here in Bellows Falls, Vermont. Cold, cold. The cats are very glad to be inside, or at least one of them is very glad to be inside. Anyway, I thought today what I would do is give you guys a glimpse into what's been on the easel and my process in doing that. We're going to jump right into it. I started doing this painting of a Pennsylvania Railroad cantilever signal taken by the great photographer Cade E. Smith. He's a railroad photographer who I've never met, but he is a good friend in that we share a love of rusting American infrastructure. And this was the shot that just captivated me. It has a haunting quality. So this is the actual photograph that I was working from. Let's move on to the next one. This was a variation where we desaturated it, keeping a little bit of the greenish color in the signal, but again, experimenting because I knew I'd be working primarily within that world of Van Dyke Brown that I like so much. So I wanted to not be slavishly recreating the photograph, the source photograph itself and the source photograph color world. Next slide, please. So I did printouts. I did and this is just on copy paper from a desktop, my crappy, badly designed Epson printer that jams all the time and I don't like very much, but I've had it for several years and so I'm still stuck with it because in the Hunter family, we just, if something functions, we keep using it. So I did a printout of the original. I did a printout of that desaturated version. And as I work on the painting, these are the references I am going back to. I'm not interested in having a super sharp, high resolution print because, again, I do not want to slavishly be copying the photograph. What I want to be doing is trying to express the thrill I get from the photograph, from the image, as opposed to simply copying the image. Otherwise, one might as well just do a big photographic blow up of the photo and be done with it. Next slide, please. So what I did was I took my handy dandy projector, which is a 15-year-old MacBook that weighs a ton and does not function unless it's plugged in, but it does what I need it to just fine. So I took that, and that is attached to an old halogen projector that I got about 10 years ago, projected the photograph, and did a trace. So onto a Blick Premier 3-foot by 6-foot stretched canvas. I bought a box of those because hollow core doors are wonderful to paint on. They also weigh a lot, or at least the ones I got weigh a lot. And this weighs somewhat less. So you can see my pencil trace onto the surface. It's a medium tooth canvas. When I work this large, I like having a kind of rougher canvas than when I do my smaller stuff up to about 16 by 32. I pretty much like having on the muslin. Larger than that, I want to have a rougher surface. It takes a lot more paint, and the rougher surface keeps me from getting too obsessed with just tightness and detail. So you can see I traced out the image, and then I start to lay in with, this is Cobra water-mixable oil. You could do it, of course, with conventional oil, but it's Cobra Van Dyke Brown. I think it's just out of the tube thickness, with maybe a little bit of safflower oil mixed in to make it a little bit greasier. but really not manipulating the paint at all. You can also see in this a couple of squeegee marks, the very, very straight lines. That is, I spread the paint out on the palette, I place the squeegee on that paint, and then I place the squeegee on, correct, that's exactly where Betty Sue. Thank you, Betty Sue, behind the scenes, doing her usual mojo and magic, but she was just pointing there with the cursor, the two very, very straight squeegee lines. And the lower one, the one with the cursor's on right now, that one is the upper boundary of that gantry-way. So I'm just painting right to that line. The other one is, I believe it's some railing that is visible. And so that just stays as it is. Okay, next slide, please, Betty Sue. This is the signal structure all painted in. Again, squeegee line for the rails in the foreground. I am just, as I said, this is out of the tube thickness, and I believe I let this sit like this and dry thoroughly. So probably let it dry for like 4 days before doing the next phase on this. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Here I am on the road again. Not this year, I'm not. Here I am filling in using a very, very watery mixture. So again, if you were using conventional oils, you'd be mixing in a lot of Gamsol. Instead, I am just mixing in a lot of water and basically almost treating it like a watercolor. The tree branch shapes are being done with my rosemary sword brush, which many of you know is one of my favorite brushes. There is a link to it on my shop page on the Hunter Studio website. But really just putting in watery mix of paint. This will dry somewhat quicker than the paint with the safflower oil in it. This will dry really overnight. Next slide, please. Okay, I have done that watery block in all the way across the painting here. And now I am starting to apply the first glaze. You see the big wide, look at that big wide, beautiful rosemary brush. That's about a 5-inch wide or 6-inch wide brush. Very soft, synthetic. So it has a bit of spring to it, but it's a very soft brush, so it's perfect for glazing. And I am applying the glaze over the whole surface. You'll see to the left of the crane, the glaze has been applied, the sky glaze. And to the right, I am just starting on the process. Next slide, please. This is the glaze itself. You can see what the colors are. The big squish of paint over there on the left is Van Dyke Brown. Then in kind of the upper center is a Cobra, I believe it is a blue violet. I had Cobra send me a wide variety of colors that I do not use in my plein air work, but I enjoy messing around within the studio. And then using an empty Amsterdam acrylic binder container, the plastic container, I add a lot of medium. I believe it's the Cobra painting medium and water. And then the water is really, it's maybe 7/8 painting medium, 1/8 water. The water just makes it apply smoother, and it kind of hastens the drying process slightly. Then I mix it very, 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 very thoroughly, so it's fully emulsified, and there aren't like little dollops of pigment in there that I'm going to be brushing and all of a sudden have a streak of purple in the sky. Well, that would be very Hank Williams. It would not be very useful for the painting. And then on my glass palette, you can see where I've brushed out the color to make sure it is. So it's the Van Dyke brown, but it also has a hint of that violet color. Next slide, please. So there we have the first pass of the glaze is done. So the signal structure was out of the tube, Van Dyke brown, with a tiny bit of safflower oil to smooth the application of the paint, just to make it brush a little bit easier. The watery pass of the railroad tracks, the other structures down at the base of the signal, and the trees, and then the first glaze of the sky. Now, why a glaze as opposed to a application of paint? What a glaze does is light travels through the glaze because the glaze is transparent. It goes through the glaze, it hits the substrate, the white gessoed surface of the canvas, and then the light bounces back. So you end up with a lot more luminosity than you would if you did an opaque paint color. This is of course my studio. You can see over on the drawing table are a whole bunch of the barn watercolor oils that I was messing around with from the Andy Evenson class that I'm taking. And then there are dead paintings down on the ground. And then on the far right, there's the painting of Emerson Road in Milford, New Hampshire that I went over a couple of weeks ago. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. Okay, now this is the second glaze. Now there's maybe 4 days in between each of these applications of glaze. So there was that first Van Dyke brown, which is semi-transparent, semi-opaque. It has a little bit of opacity, but a whole lot of medium. Then the second glaze, I was using Payne's Gray, which is a cold blue-gray. I was using more of that violet, and I was using, I believe, some ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue is a little warmer, brighter, and more enthusiastic than I was hoping, than I want. So that's why I was knocking it down with the other colors. But again, using a lot of medium, little bit of water, and brushing it on with that big, wide glazing brush. You can see it on the tabaret, the empty cat food cans, then the big, wide brush with the blue glaze. So applying it with big strokes and trying to get kind of that mottled sky, so that it really has the atmosphere in it. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. So there I have done the blue glaze on top of the brownish violet glaze. I am now starting to work from right to left. I'm left-handed, so I like to work from right to left of doing the foliage glaze. The foliage, I believe on the very right-hand side, the big dark area, I did a bunch of the sky glaze in there. And then on top of that, again, almost out of the tube thickness of Van Dyke brown, which harmonizes it, the natural world harmonizes with the structure. And then as I get into the more lighted area, I start mixing the Van Dyke brown with transparent oxide red, burnt sienna, which is very similar to transparent oxide red, except the burnt sienna is more opaque. The transparent oxide red is transparent, and transparent oxide yellow. I stopped using the burnt sienna as I moved into the areas further to the left, as you'll see in subsequent slides. but I am just working very deliberately across the painting. I'm being careful not to get, you know, my hand all painty and get paint where I don't want it to go. This is a very deliberate process. Next slide, please, Betty Sue. So here is the, there's now been a first pass, basically, of the transparent glazes in the foliage and ground plane. So I'm starting to really play up the way the light is hitting the rails, and that the brush and the side of the little signal control structure at the base of the big signal, the telephone pole there. And I'm starting to work on the extreme left. So I wanted to anchor the left side as I was working on this, so that I didn't overdo the glazing in the center. It's just a way of keeping myself honest. Now you will also see in the sky, look at how there are both the glazes across the whole thing, and then down kind of toward the horizon, you'll see kind of a whole bunch of marks, like kind of white marks. That is, for those of you who have my video, and everyone should have my video, please buy my video so the cats get to eat the good food. But if you have the video, you know about a technique that I call the "you are so stupid" technique, which comes from a recurring dream I have where I'm beating people up and telling them how stupid they are, and they're fighting back ineffectually like little Tyrannosaurus Rexes. And I have a piece of paper towel, and I go like this on the surface. And that is called the "you are so stupid" technique. And it's a way of getting a somewhat controlled but not over-controlled mark down on the surface. I wish I hadn't done it here. I don't like how dominant those marks were once the glaze really dried. And so I addressed that later on. Next slide, please. So you'll see here, I did additional glazing on top of those "you are so stupid" marks. And I really like now how kind of evocative that sky is. I like how it has that openness behind the searchlight signal. And the thing I like about the signal is the signal now kind of has the role of the moon. It's a man-made object, but it is a spherical, lighted object in the sky, where it is light in the sky behind it. I think it was not something I was thinking about when I started the painting, but it occurred as I worked on it. So I have now done glazes all the way across. I will address that in a second, Sheila. I've done glazes all the way across. I've done a whole bunch of modulating them. So the ground plane, I do not want the same tone throughout, but I want it to be unified. What I'm now going to do is let this dry for, you know, another 4 days or so, and then see what I think of it then. I don't want to be messing with it now when the glazes are still tacky. But I'm pretty happy with how the ground plane works. There's a nice depth to it. The ghostly telephone pole, telegraph pole in the distance is visible, but it's not screaming. It's not calling too much attention to itself. I'm happy. I very much like the the extreme contrast of the small white signal structure at the base of the larger signal but I may need to knock that down a little. Because it's the brightest brights are the signal and that structure. And I haven't decided if I am happy with that or not. Now, the question was, did I glaze over the structure of the train signal itself? I did not. I did not. Well, I did. I did and I did not. You'll see at the base of it, the concrete base has a bit of brightness to it. Yeah, so I did glaze over it, and then I removed the glaze with Q-tips and paper towel and stuff. Where the light is hitting this, the side of the signal structure, I again also removed, this time taking the squeegee and pulling, so taking the wet glaze and removing it with the squeegee. Yeah, on the vertical there, on the rails themselves. Okay, on the vertical there, Betty Sue, where you have the cursor just now, the vertical of that utility pole, that also was taking the squeegee after I'd glazed that whole thing, rather than painting around it. Yes, okay, so that answers. Rather than painting around where I want there to be a highlight, on that utility pole, I painted the glaze, then I took a squeegee and removed the glaze from that passage. On the very, very bright structure at the base of the signal, I did glaze around that. That has never had glaze on it in that brightest bright area. Because if I put the glaze on it and then removed it, that the tooth of the canvas would still retain a little bit of the glaze. So that's why if I was using muslin, the weave of it would be so fine that yes, I could remove virtually all visible trace of the glaze, but it would also be kind of harder to have the paint sticking to the substrate. Can I remove the glaze without an isolation coat? I can remove the glaze so long as the glaze is wet. That's why I like to work on a glazed area and finish that area and then let it dry and then work on the next area, so that I am considering as I go what my relative lights and darks are. The danger of that, though, is if you've got color world that didn't really harmonize and you've got a glaze now that doesn't harmonize with what you're working on now. But then what I would do in that case is say that blue did not go with the kind of the golden reddish browns of the ground, then I would glaze on top of the sky glaze to get it to harmonize. Or alternately, I would glaze, if I liked the sky and didn't like the ground plane, I would reglaze the ground plane with another tone to harmonize it. So anyway, so that is, I believe that's the last slide. Is that indeed the last slide, Betty Sue? Yes, it's the last slide. So that's, anyway, that's the process on this painting. I know a lot of people in our world of representationalism don't do a lot of glazing. They tend to do their brights by application of pigment. My brain, for whatever reason, likes the look of a glaze more than it does a kind of painterly brushstroke of a specific color. I like the prismatic, the almost stained glass window aspect that you get with glazes. So with smooth gesso board, you wouldn't have to paint around it. You could wipe the glaze off. Yeah. You would also have to have it dry. You'd have to lay it flat to dry, because if you put a glaze on smooth gesso board, the glaze would start to wobble down. So, well, John, the only reason I have that patience is that I am working on, at any given time, 2 or 3 different paintings. as well as the Andy Evenson watercolor course that I'm taking. So I've got plenty of other projects because during Covfefe virus, I am painting full time. But if I was having to, if I was only working on one painting at a time, I would end up mucking it up. And boy, you can muck up a glaze so thoroughly if you start glazing on top of a glaze that is not set yet. Then all the paint removes down to the substrate, and you don't want to do that. Work on multiple pieces at once, and you'll be much happier than overworking one specific piece. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. Thank you so much. Hi, Allison Green. Allison Green, who came to Roots on the River for many years, fellow lover of Stan Ridgway's music. If I recollect, she really likes the song Picasso's Mandolin, as do I. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you take good care, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.